in the sprawling concrete labyrinth of Dublin's criminal underworld. Names carry weight, and few names have echoed through the streets of Finglas quite like Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald. To the uninitiated, looking at him in his later years, he might have appeared to be just another aging man, a grandfather moving slowly through his late 40s. But in the shadowed corners of gangland circles, Fitzgerald was never just a retiree. He was a phantom, a hardened enforcer, and a survivor whose criminal roots burrowed deep into the 1990s. His story is not merely one of crime, but of a decades-long game of cat and mouse, evolving from armed robberies to the dark logistics of assassination. Before we unravel how a grandfather became the logistical backbone of a hit team, please remember to like this video and subscribe. Your support allows us to keep shining a light on these dark, true crime stories. Now, let us return to the streets of North Dublin. Patrick Fitzgerald's career did not begin with a bang, but with a calculated whisper. By the time the new millennium broke, his rap sheet was already lengthy, yet deceptively mundane. On paper, he looked like a chaotic nuisance rather than a gangland heavyweight. He had racked up an astounding 72 convictions, but the vast majority were for minor traffic-related incidents. This is a common tactic in the underworld, hiding in plain sight. By keeping his charges petty, Fitzgerald maintained a facade of incompetence, a man who could not follow road rules rather than a man orchestrating organized chaos. However, the Gardaí Islands police force were not fooled by the driving offences. Intelligence files had long flagged him as a significant figure in organized crime. A man whose reach extended far beyond a few unpaid speeding tickets. The mask slipped significantly in 2006, marking the moment Fitzgerald appeared on the radar of the fearsome Criminal Assets Bureau, or CAB. The CAB is the entity that strikes fear into Irish criminals, because they hit where it hurts most, the wallet. That year, police stopped Fitzgerald's vehicle for what seemed like a routine check, but this was no ordinary traffic stop. During a search of the car, officers pried open the spare tire stashed in the boot. Inside, tightly packed and hidden away, they discovered nearly €48,000 in cash. It was a staggering sum for a man with no legitimate income to explain. In a brazen display of arrogance, Fitzgerald looked the investigators in the eye and claimed the money was lawfully his. It was a bold lie, but the authorities saw right through it. A subsequent investigation proved the cash was the proceeds of criminal conduct, likely tied to the drug trade he was rumored to facilitate. Under a CAB order, he was forced to hand over almost €50,000. This seizure was the first public confirmation of what detectives had whispered. For years, Fishy Fitzgerald was not just a bad driver. He was a man with access to serious liquidity, deep ties to the narcotics industry, and the savvy to avoid major prison time at least for a while. By early 2010, the petty traffic offender had metamorphosed into something far more dangerous. Fitzgerald had shifted gears entirely, stepping into the role of a ringleader for a prolific armed robbery crew operating out of Finglas. This was not a group of amateurs snatching purses. This was a gang that would go on to become one of the most active and feared robbery outfits in Ireland's recent history. Between 2010 and 2020, Fitzgerald's crew was linked to approximately 20 armed raids. In a furious burst of activity spanning just under 2 years, they struck targets across Dublin, expanding their radius into Meath and Kildare. They were relentless, striking with a frequency that left law enforcement scrambling to predict their next move. These were not the clean, sophisticated heists often depicted in cinema. They were brutal, terrifying invasions. In several instances, the gang stormed into family homes, terrorizing ordinary people in their own living rooms, just to get their hands on cash, jewelry, or vehicle keys. The trauma inflicted during these home invasions left scars on the victims that lasted long after the glass was swept up. Despite the violence, Fitzgerald managed to keep a relatively low public profile during this period. Because his past convictions were still technically minor, he operated in a grey zone, known to the Gardaí specialist units but not yet a household name to the general public. However, the motivation behind this robbery spree was darker than simple greed. Authorities believed the cash generated from these violent jobs was being funneled directly into drug operations. By this point, Fitzgerald himself was heavily using cocaine. And he was not hiding it. This drug use added a volatile, erratic edge to his leadership. As his influence grew, so did his aggression. He began to act as a gangland enforcer within Finglas, ruling his turf through sheer intimidation. The control he exerted over his neighborhood was suffocating. Local families were bullied so severely that some packed up their lives and fled, abandoning their homes just to escape his shadow. Fitzgerald's crew utilized a tactic often seen in organized crime known as taking over. They would pressure terrified residents to allow their homes to be used as stash houses for drugs or weaponry. It was a takeover born of fear. Neighbors lived in constant dread, knowing that crossing Fishy Fitzgerald could mean violence visiting their doorstep. Irish police clamped down wherever they could, chipping away at his operation. In 2012, the Gardaí raided an empty house in Finglas, one of these suspected stash locations, and discovered a Gangster, makeshift cannabis grow house linked directly to Fitzgerald's crew. Inside, they seized over 100 plants worth roughly €40,000, alongside a handgun and a shotgun. It was undeniable proof that the gang was now seamlessly combining narcotics trafficking with firearms. Yet Fitzgerald had an almost uncanny ability to wriggle free. In a 2014 incident, police found a loaded gun hidden in the garden of an innocent neighbor. Believing it was connected to him, he was brought in for questioning, a moment that should have been his end, but no charges were filed due to a lack of direct evidence. Incidents like this only fed his almost mythical reputation. No matter the heat, Fishy always seemed one step ahead. By 2014, the seemingly impenetrable armor of Fishy Fitzgerald began to show fatal cracks. That year, serious charges pending against him were suddenly and inexplicably dropped. In the civilian world, this would be cause for celebration. In the paranoid, hyper-vigilant ecosystem of organized crime, it was a death knell for his reputation. Raised eyebrows turned into hushed whispers, and whispers turned into open accusations. Had he cut a deal? Was the untouchable robbery boss actually working for the cops? The suspicion spread like a virus through his crew, rotting the loyalty he had enforced through fear. The retribution was swift and humiliating. Fitzgerald was beaten savagely by his own gang members, the very men he had led into battle. Just like that, the kingpin of Finglas was dethroned, cast out, and left with nothing. Insiders later claimed that despite the fortune stolen during their decade-long spree, Fitzgerald ended up broke, shut out of the profits, and left to rot. He claimed to have given up cocaine around this time, perhaps shaken by the betrayal and the sheer scale of his fall from grace. But anyone who thought this marked the retirement of Patrick Fitzgerald was grave mistaken. He did not leave the underworld. He simply evolved. No longer the frontman of a robbery crew, he transitioned into the role of an elder statesman. A veteran advisor to a new, more volatile generation of criminals, he stayed connected to the heavy hitters of Dublin's gangland, associating with notorious figures and former allies of slain crime bosses. But his most dangerous move was entangling himself in the brutal social media-fueled feuds plaguing Finglas. This new era was defined by the Gucci gang, led by the young and flashy Glenn Ward, known as Mr. Flashy. This gang, obsessed with designer clothes and boasting alleged alliances to the Kinahan cartel, went to war with a rival crew led by James Whelan. These two factions, comprised of former friends turned bitter enemies, brought absolute chaos to the streets. Fitzgerald, now in his 40s, threw his support behind Whelan's faction. He took a young associate of Whelan's under his wing, mentoring the teenage up-and-comer in the dark arts of gangland survival. The violence escalated to a breaking point on April 3, 2022, when James Whelan was shot dead in the Deanstown Avenue area of Finglas, the first gangland murder of the year. While Mr. Flashy survived the feud, the cycle of retaliation spun out of control, morphing into something out of a futuristic thriller. By 2025, the war had embraced terrifying new technology. Fitzgerald's young protege, the same lad he had mentored, became the target of an assassination attempt that stunned investigators. In a scene reminiscent of a spy film, a drone carrying a live pipe bomb was flown over Finglas, programmed to drop its lethal payload on the young gangster. The plot failed, and the bomb missed its mark, but the message was chillingly clear. The rules of engagement had changed. These criminals were now weaponizing technology to hunt each other from the skies. And standing in the shadows of this high-tech warfare was the old veteran, Fishy Fitzgerald, still involved, still pulling strings, and guiding the young men fueling this bloody, modern war. Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald and Gary the Canary Carey, two names now inextricably linked in the bloody ledger of Dublin's gangland history. It was the attempted assassination of Carey in late 2021 that would ultimately mark the beginning of the end for Fitzgerald's freedom. Gary Carey was a known quantity in the underworld, a drug dealer based in West Dublin who had managed to navigate the treacherous waters of the drug trade until late 2021. By then, he had made powerful enemies. Intelligence reports from the Gardaí suggested he had fallen foul of a major organized crime group in Ballyfermot. The threat against his life was severe, credible, and imminent. That threat materialized into brutal reality on the night of November 17, 2021. Carey was visiting a house on Ballyfermot Crescent in Dublin 10. The evening was dark, the streets quiet. At around 7:30 p.m. he stepped out to his car, completely unaware that a hit team was lying in wait, watching his every move. This was a professional ambush, timed to the second. Just as Carey started the engine of his Volkswagen, a stolen black Opel Zafira screeched to a halt in front of him, boxing him in. There was no room to maneuver. Within seconds, two gunmen emerged and opened fire through the windscreen, unleashing 10 rounds at close range. The glass shattered, the sound of gunfire tearing through the neighborhood. Carey was hit twice in the stomach. Bleeding heavily and fueled by pure adrenaline, he somehow managed to open his door and scramble out. In a desperate bid for survival, he ran back towards the house, fleeing through the property to the back garden. As the gunman continued to fire, he vaulted over a garden wall, putting solid concrete between himself and the assassins. Against all odds, he survived the initial onslaught. Neighbors, alerted by the gunfire, found him collapsed and called for help. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, where surgeons managed to remove one bullet. However, the second projectile was lodged too close to his vital organs to be safely extracted, a permanent reminder of how close he came to death. While the gunman pulled the triggers, Patrick Fitzgerald was the invisible hand that made the attempt possible. His role was not that of the executioner, but of the quartermaster. The success of a gangland hit relies on logistics, and this was Fitzgerald's domain. In the days leading up to the shooting, he had sourced the burners, disposable vehicles used for the crime. He purchased the black Opel Zafira for a mere €750 and a second vehicle, a Toyota Avensis, for about €800. He did not just buy them, he prepped them. He fueled up the Zafira, scoped out the ambush site in advance, and handed the keys over to the hit team. After the shooting, while Carey lay bleeding, Fitzgerald helped the gunman vanish. The Zafira was found burned out shortly after, with 2 handguns left inside to melt in the flames. The Avensis, used as the secondary getaway car, was also torched and abandoned that same night. It was a textbook cleanup operation, designed to leave nothing behind but ash. Investigating a gangland hit is a painstaking process of digital archaeology. The detectives assigned to the Carey attempted murder knew they were dealing with professionals. But even the most seasoned criminals leave footprints in the digital sand. The Gardaí pulled hours of CCTV footage from across the city, meticulously cross-referencing grainy images with cell phone, tower data. The persistence paid off. In court, it was revealed that Fitzgerald's own phone data and local CCTV footage placed him squarely at the center of the plot. He was captured on camera driving the scout cars around Finglas in the week preceding the attack. The invisible logistics man had been watched all along. It became undeniable. Fitzgerald was the backbone of the operation, the man who facilitated the violence without pulling the trigger. As for Gary the Canary Carey, his survival at Ballyfermot Crescent bought him only a fleeting extension on his life. Fearing for his safety, he briefly relocated to Spain, but the pull of home, or perhaps the hubris of survival, brought him back to Dublin in June 2022. It was a fatal mistake. Just 7 months after the first ambush, Carey was shot multiple times in a separate incident in the south inner city. This time, there were no miracles. He died from his injuries on August 5, 2022. While Fitzgerald was not involved in that final fatal attack, the Gardaí had already built a steel trap case linking him to the first attempt. He was arrested and charged, initially facing a potential life sentence for attempted murder. Facing overwhelming evidence, he made a strategic retreat in May 2025, pleading guilty to the lesser charge of facilitating a criminal organization, an admission that saved him from a life sentence but guaranteed significant prison time. Yet the true measure of Fitzgerald's desperation revealed itself while he was out on bail, awaiting this very trial. Unable to stay away from the life, or perhaps needing money as his empire crumbled, he participated in a violent home invasion in August 2023. This was not a gangland standoff. It was a brutal attack on the vulnerable. Fitzgerald and several associates stormed a home in South Dublin during the early hours, targeting an elderly couple in their 70s, their adult daughter, and a 6-year-old child. The gang tied up the family and ransacked the house, believing a relative's former bank job meant cash was hidden inside. It was a terrifying ordeal for the victims and a pathetic low for Fitzgerald. The respected gangland figure was now reducing himself to terrorizing pensioners and children for a quick score. When the case reached the courts in February 2025, the defense's pleas for leniency fell on deaf ears. The judge sentenced him to 7.5 years for the home invasion alone, with sentencing for the Carey plot set to follow in mid-2025. The cumulative effect is clear. For Patrick "Fishy" Fitzgerald, the clock has finally run out. He sits behind bars today, an aging man staring down consecutive sentences that will likely see him spend the rest of his functional life in a cell. His legacy is not one of glory, but of fear, broken families, and a community scarred by his decades of intimidation. In the end, the myth of the untouchable gangster was dismantled by relentless police work and the weight of his own desperate crimes. After a lifetime on the Dublin streets, Patrick Fitzgerald is finally right where he belongs.